Hi everyone, welcome to my Ignite session. During this session, you'll be learning.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Microsoft Ignite session on building dynamic websites using static web apps. We have the code of conduct posted in the Q&A session. And sorry, we had some technical difficulties in the beginning. I would like to welcome to the presenter of the session, Korede, who is the Gold Student Ambassador from Nigeria. And without further ado, let's start.
Yeah, hi everyone, welcome to my Ignite session. So during this session, you'll be learning how to build dynamic websites with Azure Static Web Apps. I'm Korede Bashir. I'm a software engineer and a Gold Microsoft Launch Student Ambassador at Ekiti State University here in Nigeria. I've been a Gold Student Ambassador for the past 9 months. And as a Gold Student Ambassador, I get the opportunity to mentor computer science students as well as non-computer science students. And being a software engineer, I get the opportunity to build web apps using Python and JavaScript. With JavaScript, I get to work with building dynamic UIs while tweaking them as much as I see fit. And we definitely get to see an example of that as this session goes on. So, going forward, the first thing that I'll be talking to you about is what Azure Static Web Apps is. So then next up, I'll just tell you why you should make use of Azure Static Web Apps for your next static web app deployment. Next up, I'll get to tell you how Azure Static Web Apps pretty much works. And finally, I'll be showing you how to walk through, I'll be showing you a demo on how to make sure you deploy a static web app. So with static web apps, you get the opportunity to be assured that your static web app transitions from code to global scale. So with Azure Static Web Apps, you get the opportunity to build your static web app and ensuring the smooth transition from being just a line of code or multiple lines of code to global scalability. As a web developer, this really is a good deal. So now speaking of code, as of right now, Azure Static Web Apps pretty much supports the most popular JavaScript frameworks, ranging from AngularJS to React.js, Vue.js, and Vue.js. And it was announced during the first day of 2020 that Azure Static Web Apps now offers support for Blazor, which is really a good deal of news for .NET developers. So with Azure Static Web Apps, you get the opportunity to build and host your static web apps. And it doesn't stop at that really, because you also get the required authentication that your static web app needs. So Azure Static Web Apps provides the authentication and authorization process that your static web app needs to manage user access. Additionally, you get REST APIs that are powered by Azure Functions. So these REST APIs basically are serverless APIs that your static web app will connect to as a backend service. And finally, you also get access to a CI/CD workflow that is being powered by GitHub Actions. So Azure Static Web Apps pretty much sets up a GitHub Action workflow for you based on the requirement. So let me put all of this into context for you. So right here, say you set up an app repository on GitHub that includes your app folder, which is named with this app text here. So this app folder would house your static contents, like your HTML files, CSS files, and JavaScript files. So every time you make a Git push or a PR to the main repo that houses this content, Azure Static Web Apps automatically creates a GitHub action, which would in turn set up the workflow that your app needs to deploy your static contents as well as your Azure Functions powered API. So these static contents and your Azure powered APIs basically make up a full stack web app, which has the front end and the back end. So this full stack web app would be deployed across clients, making the process seamless. So this pretty much is a single unified workflow that is being provided. With Azure Static Web Apps, you get access to a single unified workflow Static Web App that is powered by Azure Function, by Azure Static Web. So next up, you also get access to functions. And finally, you get access to integrated authentication with flexible rules and access that helps you in ensuring that a user is really who they say they are. So now that we are done with that, I will be walking you through a demo on how Azure Static Web Apps ensure that you make the right deployments and make the right transition of your static web app from code to global scalability. So I could entertain some questions.
Yeah, I think we are having problems presenting the demo right now. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat. And meanwhile, I have the question for Korede. What would be the main advantage of using static web apps with Azure Functions? Like if you need a dynamic behavior, what would be the advantage of using static web apps plus Azure Functions compared to traditional ASP.NET web app?
Yeah, say you run a normal static web app without, say, Azure Static Web Apps or without a CI/CD process. So say you just deploy the static web app, you don't get access to a workflow. So this continuous integration and the continuous deployment workflow pretty much ensures that you do make the right staging of your application. So you could, without your static web apps, you get access to stage an application for better users, while staging the other one, which would be the production environment, the production app in this case, for the real users. So with Azure Static Web Apps, you get access to do all of this. So you can make changes to the state app if they are bugs. And Azure Static Web Apps automatically does the CI/CD process again to ensure that the newly created app, the app that has been fixed, that ensure that Azure Static Web Apps pretty much does the continuous deployment and continuous integration into the production app seamlessly. So we'll say you have a version 1 per se, and this version 1, you want to make an update to the version 1. So you could use Azure Static Web Apps to create the second version, then roll out this version to some set of users using a URL that Azure Static Web Apps will provide you with. So once the user has tested the web app, you can now make the integration from the stage environment into the production environment. So Azure Static Web Apps pretty much offers all of this and more.
Thank you. So there is a question in the chat. Carnegie asks that he's interested in using static web apps, building static web apps using Blazor. Are there any learning path or content available in more details that would be useful to learn how to do that?
Yes, there are resources on Microsoft Learn, but because Azure Static Web Apps just recently announced support for Blazor, so there might not be content on Blazor for Azure Static. Be on the lookout for content on Microsoft Learn. So I believe in a couple of days, much more Azure advocates or more MVPs or much more Microsoft enthusiasts would start writing content around Blazor on Azure Static Web Apps. So you could basically look out for this.
Okay, is it possible, the question from Miko, is it possible to run React Native apps using in static web apps?
Azure Static Web Apps pretty much supports React as of right now. So it depends on how well you can tweak your React Native application to work seamlessly with React. So I believe there are not much differences between React and React Native, just that React Native is the native support for React applications. So Azure Static Web Apps as of right now supports React. So you can make and deploy React apps on Azure Static Web Apps using the CI/CD process that Azure Static Web Apps will provide you with. We just need to make some few configurations and settings within the Azure Static Web Apps.
Thank you. There are also two related questions. First of all, is it called static web app because it cannot connect to the database, or Azure Functions can be used for that? And the second related question is, can you just tell a little bit more on how Azure Functions are used to make those web apps dynamic?
In the dynamic sense, what I mean basically by dynamic is the way you get to tweak your HTML content, making use of some JavaScript logic. So a JavaScript logic would be your React code, which basically tweaks the HTML elements. So that basically is the real meaning behind the dynamic word. So Azure Static Web Apps pretty much offers support for this dynamism. So anytime you make changes to your HTML code using JavaScript or say .NET, because the Azure Static Web Apps now offers support for the Blazor. So if you make changes to your Blazor app using .NET code, Azure Static Web Apps pretty much still supports that. So that is the real sense behind the dynamic word. So you can build dynamic websites on top of Azure Static Web Apps.
So I guess to put it in a slightly different way, the static web app is called static because you do not generate HTML on the server. And what you do, all the logic happens on the client side. So from the static web app itself, it just serves you HTML pages, and they can connect to the dynamic logic, which is built using Azure Functions, unlike ASP.NET application, which contains the logic on the server side. And you have differently working and differently looking applications. So any other questions you have, please post them in the chat. There is a question. If you add the folder from GitHub, does it mean that the site runs directly from the repository?
So if you, I talked about that during, I can't remember the number that slide falls in. So, but anytime you connect your Azure Static Web App, so there's the Azure Static Web App service on the Azure portal. So before you can set up an Azure Static Web App, you need to connect your GitHub account with the Azure Static Web App service. So once you connect this, you can now select a repo from your list of repositories that you want Azure Static Web Apps to look out for changes for. So say you create an app repository on your GitHub account called Azure Static Web App Starter or Azure Static Web App Service. So anytime there is a change to this Azure Static Web App Service repository, Azure Static Web App automatically does an automated CI/CD process, which will be powered by GitHub Actions in this sense. So this GitHub Actions workflow will definitely do the building process and the deployment process through Azure Static Web App.
Thank you. There is also a question that for now, only HTTP triggered functions are supported. And is there going to be support for timer triggers Azure Functions as well?
Possibly there could be support for other Azure Functions type like dog trigger and trigger as well. There could be support in the future for that. But as of right now, Azure Static Web Apps pretty much offers the support for HTTP triggers. So anytime you make a request to your function code via HTTP, then the Azure Functions API will definitely send back a response. So you can tweak the response, how you want the response context to be. So Azure Static Web App, Azure Functions rather, would send back this response as a response to the request that has been made by anyone that has made that request for any app that requests for the content. So your Azure Functions API will definitely send back a response that you could construct within the response context. So yeah, with Azure Functions, there would be some kind of an index.js file which would serve as the place where your backend code will live. So you can pretty much write the logic for your backend code within that file. So anytime there's a request to your API endpoint, then that content gets fetched.
Yeah, so there are still some questions about how do you use Azure Functions to access database backends. Yeah, if you want to add something, maybe a simple example how this can be done.
Can you kindly repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is how to use Azure Functions to access database backend. I think you pretty much talked about that, but maybe try to rephrase it or give some simple example.
Okay. So yeah, you could basically work with databases with Azure Static Web Apps. So say you're building a React application that says lists a product. So then this list of products would need to be fetched anytime there are requests for, say, user wants to buy the content. Then the user scrolls through, then clicks a button. So every time this user clicks a button, then the request will be sent to the Azure functions, which will definitely connect to your database to fetch this content and send back the response. So the response structure could be structured with a JSON format. So with a key value pair format. So anytime there is a request, then the Azure function will process this request and send back the right response back to the caller.
Excellent. Thank you. So the one more question is, if we create applications in the serverless manner, does it give additional load to the browser?
If you create additional, I didn't get the question perfectly.
Yeah, if you create a static web app basically with the serverless code, does it give additional load to the browser?
No, it doesn't. So I talked about how Azure Static Web Apps pretty much transitions your static web app from just being code to making your static web app available globally. So Azure Static Web Apps pretty much handles all of these server load times and all. It balances the load on top of your static web app as well. So all this is done through the Azure Functions integration. So you do not need to manage any virtual machine or server. So anytime there is some sort of lag or latency on top of your server, then Azure Function pretty much does all of the hard work of ensuring that it balances the load properly. So you do not need to worry about that basically.
Yeah, so I think there is a small confusion here because serverless does not mean that nothing happens on the server. Serverless just means that you do not need to like manually configure the server to run the function. And Azure function just runs. Azure runtime automatically takes care about how this function is provisioned and deployed. And in general, if you talk about static web apps versus like dynamic web apps, definitely a little bit more processing is put on the client, but that creates also much better user experience. So I think that's the good balance between giving some load for the browser and having the great user experience. So any other questions that you might have, please post them in the chat. Maybe while we are waiting for more questions, can you maybe give your own overview? Like, do you think static web apps, like client-based rich UI, is better than old school like dynamic web apps, or how do you compare them? Like,
yeah. So with your old school mode of building and deploying website code, whereby you get to probably get an hosting and a domain, then you push your code via FTP or something. Or with Azure Static Web App, you pretty much get the seamless workflow, which basically would be an integration of GitHub Actions, Azure Functions, and Azure itself. So all these tools are basically modern day tools that most developers use. So with GitHub Actions, you get access to a seamless workflow. With Azure Functions, you get access to serverless APIs that will serve as the backend for your application. And you also get access to Azure, which will basically help in ensuring that your app is on a server that promises at least the 99.9% uptime. So Azure Static Web Apps is pretty much cool, and yeah, a really cool new service from the Azure team.
yeah, and this brings us to one more question. Can you elaborate a little bit more on CI/CD process for Azure Static Web Apps? You mentioned that they are very easily deployed using CI/CD.
Yeah.
How does that work?
How the CI/CD process pretty much works is that anytime you make a change, but before you make a change, let me emphasize this. So every time you create a new static web app on top of the Azure Static Web App service, Azure Static Web Apps automatically sets up a GitHub workflow on your repository on GitHub. So this GitHub workflow is basically a list of YAML commands. So it would be a YAML file. So inside this YAML file would be a list of YAML commands, which would include the OS that the application would run on top. The Docker environment, the containerized environment, as well as a load of all other commands that will be useful in deploying and scaling your application. So this YAML file is basically what the CI/CD process would work with. So GitHub Actions would look through these commands one by one, then work on top of these commands as say this GitHub Actions per se would work on each of these commands sequentially. So it would process one command at a time, process a command, say, to set up an environment within Linux. Then the next command could be probably to create a folder or something. So this list of commands will be triggered and run one after the other. So that is how Azure Static Web Apps pretty much works.
Excellent. And I think the last question for today is, do you know when we expect to have Azure Static Web Apps move from preview to general availability?
There are no context around that for now. But right now, Azure Static Web Apps pretty much still offers support across 5 regions. So these regions are mostly within the US and Europe. So if you stay around the US or Europe, you could basically access an Azure region that provides support for Azure Static Web Apps.
One more question. Can we save cost if we go with static web apps?
Yeah, you can. The short answer to that. So the long answer would be that it depends on how your static web apps pretty much works. So let's say you're developing an app that probably works with database and gets loads of requests and requires much more bandwidth. So that would pretty much increase your costs on the Azure on Azure properly. So this pretty much it boils down to how your static web apps pretty much works. So if it's just a single web app, as I say, a single HTML content that displays let's say an information about your company or about you. So you could basically use Azure Static Web App and be rest assured that you wouldn't be spending anything much. So what you would be spending would range from $0.9 to probably $2 the minimum at the maximum per se. So it depends on how your static web apps pretty much works.
Excellent. We have actually 1 minute left, and there is one more question. Can we have many instances of the same web app which talk to the single Azure function endpoint? As far as I understand, that's quite common behavior, right?
Yeah, it is, yes. So you could basically connect series of applications to your Azure functions. So how you basically do that is within your code logic, you would probably reference the Azure Functions API. So within, let's static web app as an example. So within your index.js file, you could create a fetch method, use the fetch method, then reference within that fetch method, then you could pass in the endpoints that you've created. So these endpoints would be referenced within the fetch method. So inside this fetch method, the endpoints will serve as the parameter, as the argument within the fetch method. So you could replicate this across apps as well. So all of these apps would get access to this same Azure Functions API.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kure. We had slight problems, so excuse us for that you will not be able to see the demo, but we had the great Q&A session instead of that. So thank you so much for being here. You can fill in the evaluation and see the additional sample code and resources for this session in the chat Q&A. And I hope you have the great rest of Ignite. Thanks for staying with us. Have a good day.